Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of What's Your Perspective. Today we talk with Fernie Lai, co-founder of Way Studio, about the remarkable project Courtyard 35 in Beijing. Way Studio has transformed this historic courtyard into a vibrant urban space, blending old and new elements with a stunning cloud bridge installation. Join us as we explore how they redefine traditional architecture, creating a perfect mix of nature, modernity, and cultural heritage. Hope you enjoy it.
This is Courtyard 35, Hutong Cloudscape, and this is our most recent published project. So this is currently on a lot of platforms that you see. So with this project, this is actually located in central Beijing, in this red spot in the lower right hand corner here. And what's marked in white is kind of imperial Beijing inner city, where the summer palace is. And then marked in yellow is Wangfuzing Street, which is a very famous commercial district here in central Beijing. So our project is located smack between kind of imperial Beijing and new commercial Beijing. And so it's a very central location in that sense. And this is the original condition of the courtyard itself. So what happened is within this location before during imperial Beijing, the close relatives of the imperial family would reside in this area. And so the street is also called Nanhe Yandajie, which kind of means that a river flows through it. So this would be outside of the imperial. And so you can see in the original architecture that it was all kind of demolished and rebuilt into kind of a modern residential complex with a two-story building would be the north end of the project. And then with the single-story building that would wrap around in the old courtyard, kind of in the footprint of the old courtyard, but the building would be completely new. So in this aspect, when we were going through, and also you can see like it had a lot of Chinese decorative styles placed on the facade of the building, but these are not actually load-bearing columns at all. They're mostly decorative. So when we were on site, this became something that we were thinking about how to kind of respect that history, but while keeping what we think is really valuable, which would be how the space is used, the footprint of the buildings rather than the buildings itself. So, and also with this view, you can see how on the first time we were on site, we climbed that roof, and this is also kind of where we got that idea of working with kind of that in between space, that space that's floating on at roof height rather than working with the building itself. So this is kind of how we were inspired to create the cloudscape itself, to work with the roof line and roof height rather than working and altering the building itself. And also one of the reasons that's what we selected to do is because when we were given the brief for this project, it wasn't a fixed function. Like it wasn't that, there was this restaurant that wanted to rent this place. It wasn't that, there was this cafe, so it wasn't a fixed function or program at the time when we were given the project. Rather, it was like a blurry idea that the client wanted to make this a more open and public space because it's really good real estate, because it's in the center of the city and it's so close to the commercial area and so close to the imperial area, the old imperial area where there would be a lot of tourists. So they wanted to transform it. It would be unsuitable as a residential complex already. And that's also quite apparent because the previous occupants of this courtyard was an office rather than a residential family or several residential families or whatnot. So in that sense, this courtyard already had that kind of that direction in opening it up. So that's what we were asked by our clients to do, to make it a more public space. So when we were working with the building, then we thought to, rather than working with altering the building itself, that we would alter the void in between. So instead of renovating the building itself, then we did what we kind of call ourselves an installative renovation, where we inserted this cloud bridge into the space that is remaining from the courtyard building itself. And then that alters how the space itself is used, because it creates this gray area between the void and the building itself.
And Rennie, I have a question
then,
here. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you have this kind of futuristic design style, but you work in the historic side. Like, what's the public view to that, and what's your client reaction to this type of a style when you want to introduce it to this historic building? Because I think that's a major problem in like most countries. Like, what's the people reaction to doing such a thing to a historic building?
Yes, so there is a lot of controversy for sure. I think with the client, there were no problems, because this is what, when they come to us, we have already this type of work in our portfolio. So when they came to us, this was for sure what they were thinking, along the lines of what they were thinking. Of course, it's not exactly what they were thinking, but when it comes to the public, there's a lot of controversy. And we also did a bit of a study to make sure it's not a historic building itself. So what I was saying before, that it was already rebuilt in the 90s, means it doesn't have such a high level of historic value in that sense. And so also, like, when we were doing hutong studies before, like, it has to do a lot with the footprint and the fabric of the hutong, rather than the buildings itself that has historic value. So we worked with that, the empty space, and instead was one of the reasons as well that then that we're not altering the original buildings. So we keep that intact in case they want to come and refurbish that. So so that's kind of how we work. But there are a lot of controversy with working with the courtyard, because for example, some people would say, oh, you're altering kind of the sunlight level that you get from the interior space by adding this area in front. And it's very not what you would expect in I think a courtyard renovation. So, but it also means then it gets a lot of attention.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually, I think with some of the views that we see here, how then the old and the new is in conversation and with respect, rather than that we kind of completely demolish what was existing. I think a lot of people can see that as well when they're going through the site. So, as well as this is one of my favorite images, where we get the original guardhouse and the original kind of entrance area in conversation with the new bridge here. So, and as well as what I was saying before, how there was no fixed use or program with the space when we were given the project. This kind of happened in conversation with the client when we opened it up. Then we broke up all of the spaces within the courtyard, and here then in the original guardhouse would be the cafe that would then surface the rest of the courtyard. So people can buy a cup of coffee here and then meander into the courtyard space. And so here you can see their guardhouse then from bottom up, I guess, because this would be how we would enter the space. So there's the cafe in the guardhouse, original guardhouse. And then you would come into the entrance mini courtyard first, and then you would go into kind of a narrowing space, kind of like a river. And then you would go into the main courtyard, which then opens up again. And on the left-hand side, which is the south wing of the courtyard, then we have the multi-function room, which sometimes is used as a pop-up store or an exhibition, and then sometimes as a dining space. And then through there to the west side of the south wing is where the core function of the restaurant is hosted. So you can see on the bottom left corner is where the kitchen is, where the right roof is. And then that extends out into a open kitchen bar top restaurant area. And then as you come along to the west wing, that's where there's like a wine cellar, and then the rest of the dining area. And then as you arrive into the north wing, it's their internal offices, and then a VIP room. And then on the upstairs level, on the second floor, as a connection to the cloudscape, is then a Chinese Studies Institute that kind of uses that space with the tea room and with a study then where they would do calligraphy classes, Chinese study classes and things like that. And that is accessed through the staircase on the bottom or directly through the cloud bridge. And then what we found was really interesting in that the client, I mean, this was our original intention, but we, of course, sometimes worry that, maybe then it's not so used as we imagined. And so one of the interesting things is when the client came back to us and said, a lot of people would then use and linger beneath the cloud bridge, so that they would really, a lot of people like staying underneath this kind of canopy space. And that really alters how the interior space was used in this project, so that people don't just come out and then into another interior space. Rather, they would stay and use the void as well as the internal spaces. So I think that was really interesting when it was actually came into use. So this is views of the bridge in the courtyard. It really wraps the buildings in that sense. And then this is how we are working with the roof level. We're actually touching the building, as you can see, but actually structurally we're separate. There's a gap in between that's that we use silicone, so they move separately and differently. The new insertion is steel structure, and the original building itself is concrete. So, and then this is the space underneath. And so a lot of people like being in this space, we found, especially during the day. And there are two really old ancient trees right in the entrance space, which is where this image is taken. And so we really kind of embrace those trees as well when we came in, and that creates kind of the entrance courtyard, the first courtyard that you enter through. And then you would see on the right-hand side is that sliver of river that brings you into the main courtyard space, and then the staircase on the left that brings you up into the cloud bridge. So this is from the other end, you can see the tree kind of framed and within that the bridge scape. Yeah. And also you can see that we created,
For a second, I just want to talk about like the meaningful concept part of your work and how you get these ideas. And I saw a poem, a very beautiful Chinese poem that inspired this project. Can you explain more about this one?
So yes, that's actually quite a famous poem in Chinese. 北有洞天, it means I didn't put it in the presentation because I don't think I can translate it very well, but I would try. But so what it means is that you would open up a space and be surprised by spectacle. Is kind of our understanding of what the poem is describing. And it actually describes kind of climbing a mountain and going through natural scenery when you turn a corner on a hike and then you come into an open space. And so that was kind of the experience that we wanted to recreate as we were entering this courtyard, that because the door, as you can see when we look back onto it, is a very, very small entryway, very secluded. Even though it's on a main street, it's a very small doorway, and you would come in and you would open up into this amazing space. And so that's kind of the experience that we wanted to recreate when we were doing this project.
And I get that how you can translate this meaning to the form, but it's such a hard job to make it transfer a meaning into a physical form, in the way that you are doing in these futuristic forms. I think that's a really hard challenge. Do you have any advice or even an instruction about how you get this idea and change it to the physical direction?
Yeah, this is one of the interesting. I'm also learning this as we go, of course. But when we go into talking about Chinese historic paintings and artwork and things like that, it's very abstract. I think some of the things that they're describing with words and with painting. And I think that's one of the most amazing things, like when we're looking at Chinese paintings, how you could put something that's very far and very near in the same painting and still have it work in a sense. And so that's some of the things that we're doing when we're working with a design. Is it's kind of like painting or drawing for us in a way. It's one of the very important kind of background educations that Tao had when he was much younger, was learning to draw and paint and translating that then back into physical space.
So it kind of comes from the culture, the heritage, right?
I think to translate these ideas into poetic space, that definitely comes from this type of understanding. That we ask ourselves all the time as well, because in our background, in my educational, like I was educated in the West, and how is educated in East, and we definitely sometimes have that what you might call it, those differences in the way that we work. But I think in the end, when we go through the space, it has, when you come down to experience and into feeling and things like that, I think it's a very universal language. And so sometimes what we put that poem in the very beginning, also for us, so that our client would get what we were trying to do right away. Because then we can bring that poetic essence into the project and be able to explain what we were doing and why we chose to alter the project this way. And it worked with them very well. Like when they saw the poem, they understood right away that we wanted to create that spectacle, that fluidity, and that kind of abstract space then made sense in the space. So I think it was really nice in that sense that sometimes it helps explain what you're trying to do rather than having to explain it with a lot of logic, which sometimes I find works against us, because a lot of times we're talking to clients that don't have the professional training or that training in aesthetics that we have. So I think that's kind of how it worked for us.
And I think since this is so abstract, it's easier to bring it through the future. Like it doesn't have a defined shape. Like you can shape it in the time, in the moment. Like exactly in the poem that says like beyond human realm. And this is exactly that. Like the meaning is abstract. So it's timeless, and you can basically do this in your project.
Yeah. So
we get really deep so fast, I think.
Yeah, although I am also quite curious. I read in the description that you tried to integrate the old and the new and try to preserve it and incorporate it in the design. So what aspects of the old were you able to translate into this, into your design right now specifically?
I think so I mentioned before the footprint of the courtyard is definitely carries historic value in the way the space is situated, that it's a courtyard with a central courtyard with buildings wrapping around it. I think this for sure has its historic value. And then the second thing that has historic value is the roofscape. When it joins, we don't have very good images of this, but in the hutongscape, the roofscape is really important because a lot of people climb it. Like when you're in the space, the first thing you want to do is you want to climb up higher and to be able to see, because within the second ring hutongscape, there aren't a lot of tall buildings in this area. It's that historic Beijing fabric here. And so it's that kind of wave of roofs that continues on in this area. So those are the two things that we for sure wanted to maintain, and that's why it's that the roof is framed within kind of the bridge as well, and the relationship, how we situated it right below the roof so that you're walking right next to it, as if you're kind of floating at that level. So I think there's that, and then And then that would be the sequence of spaces.
You can see the palace when you're up in the second floor?
You cannot see the palace. There are a lot of trees, and then there's a taller building just off to the west of us, so we can't see the palace itself. And we're also at such an angle that the taller buildings of the palace is farther north from where we are. So we are kind of parallel to the gates of the Imperial Palace instead. So we can't actually see the palace itself.
But still, you get this cultural like environment, right? Like when you're in this like corridor with this shape, but you still get the historic like aspect of the city.
Yeah, because you can also see the roof, of the old building as well, right?
Yeah, behind that. So the interesting thing about this location is on one end, on the east side of the street, it's mostly new buildings already, and then on the west side of the street where we are located, it's mostly old buildings with some low-rise new buildings. So that's
And we also ask simple and even like practical and technical questions as well. So first, what type of material are you using in this curves that you have? It seems like a really thin. Are these like metal sheets?
Yes, this is so we created this as an installation piece, a landscape installation piece into the courtyard space. So actually, as I mentioned before, it doesn't, when it touches the building itself, the structure is separate. We just connected the floor material to the side of the building, but this is completely metal frame, steel frame structure, while the original building is concrete beam and column and walls. And so with the structure itself, you can see we did single layered columns onto the middle, and they're thicker so that we don't have to do 2 layers of columns on each side. And the curve itself acts as stabilizing structure the entire thing acts like a beam that sits on top of these columns. So we didn't have to add a second layer of beams on top of that. And we're using the railing. We made the railing slightly thicker so that would act as the beam instead of adding a beam and then the railing on top of it. So this was something we debated as well in the beginning, where to do a beam and then a lighter railing on top. And when we did the structural calculations, then we combined the two, the beam and the railing. So right now it's a thicker layer of steel panel that is broken up into arches. And so when it sits on top of the edge, then it stabilizes the entire structure. So that's kind of how it works.
And what about the color? What made you guys go for the color white in the design?
We actually had 2 versions in the very beginning. We wanted to go for, the white is kind of a neutral palette here, and also because then it reflects the light and the shadows of the trees and all of that very nicely. The alternative was to go completely dark, so we went for a rust color, very natural, very earth-like. And because of the scale of the courtyard, because it's quite a small space, then it ended up being really heavy on top. So we went for a completely light palette in the end when we did the test on site.
Yeah, maybe last question for me. How long did it take you to construct all this?
So we came up with the design within the first month. And then we did all of the drawings and all of the structural calculations within the first couple of months. And this project actually we did at the end, so right before COVID ended in China. So we were still within COVID restrictions in terms of construction and all of that. So it took a bit longer to construct. I think from design to it being opened was about 8 or 9 months. So yeah, that would be a bit longer than usual for such a scale of project, and also because it's located in central Beijing, so transportation of materials and such would be a bit more difficult. They would only be able to bring in trucks and such at night, and so on. So that extended the construction period as well. So about 8 or 9 months for the entire construction phase.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. Okay, so Maddie,
I have one question here, and I know lots of people want to know this one, but we talked about abstract meaning and the design process. But when you want to start design such a project, the first idea, I know you are in such an advanced level of computer simulation and modeling, but I want to know, you start this by paper, sketching on paper, then transfer it in the computer. Is start with some algorithm in computer? Because I know lots of people want to know this. When you see such a project, what happened there? What was the first steps?
For this project, we actually didn't use any computer-aided design until the kind of the schematic and DD stage. So when we brought in structural calculations, the first version was done purely by hand in modeling. So we did sketch on the plan, and then we brought it in, and then we would our working process is mostly that we walk through the model again and again at human scale, in human view. We put people in, we put greenery in, and I think it does definitely have a lot to do with the advance in technology that we can now be in render space very quickly, I think, which is quite different than, let's say, 10 years ago, when you would have to have that ability to imagine the space, and most of the designers can do that, but you wouldn't be able to show your client so easily. And I think that's something that's changed a lot over the last 5 or 10 years. And so we started with the 3D model very quickly after just 1 or 2 versions of pen sketches, and we were in the model. And once the space looked good, then we would bring that to the client. And then in the kind of the development stage, when we brought in structural engineers and things like that, then we brought in the computer-aided design where we put that into a script so that they would be able to put in the structural parameters and to alter the curves. So all of the curves are then recalculated so that it will bring in structural value in that sense. So we used it in that process. Yeah.
The reason why I asked that, when people see such a project, they assume this is 100% computer based. They had such an algorithm, they had such a script, this is the outcome. But it's not that. You had the whole idea, yes, abstract meaning, you bring it kind of, I can say, through the painting, then to the architectural design. You have these lines, yes, then transfer it to the model, then transfer it to the algorithm and whatever. So this is really important to know, and thank you for sharing this with us.
Yeah,
and you also said that you, yes.
I was just going to add that we do, because I think the feeling of the hand is very important. We have all this technology in front of us, but it still comes down to our hands and eyes and our brain to do this. So I think it's almost like the process of training someone to paint or to draw, I think, the way we work in the model. So,
and the connection, the human side of this is much higher than just the computer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lai.
And you also mentioned you had to make a 1:1 scale of this on site before you implemented it.
We because it's so close, the project's so close to us, we were on site a lot. We were there basically every week or so, and we worked very closely with the construction team to test each step. So from when we put down the platform without the railings, we went on site to get a feel for the scale, that space between the opening and the side, whether the walkway was wide enough, whether it would be too narrow in certain places, how that felt on site. And we went on site, and also when they were doing the openings, how high the railing was, what color it would be. Like you guys were asking why we selected white in the beginning, because the original color of the steel was quite dark as well. So that confirmed our decision in the beginning for it to be white when we went on site, and it looked really, really dark in the raw steel material as well. Yeah. So that's kind of how we worked through that process.
Yeah. That's also a really important part of the process, right? Like getting a feel of the actual space rather than just quickly translating it from paper and then into the
and experimented in real life.
Especially when we're working with curved spaces. It has a lot to do with that human scale, like when you open and close that hallway and so on. So we have to be on site in key moments in order to make sure that nothing goes wrong with those moments. Yeah.